Hello and welcome to IDology Podcast. I'm your host Jesse,
I'm your host, Brendan.
and today our guest is Ivan. Ivan, can you
Hello,
introduce yourself?
Yes, I absolutely can. Thank you for having me on the show.
No problem.
Small little background about me. I am a 20-year-old university student on the west coast of California.
Mm-hmm.
And for the past 4 years or so, I'd say I've been involved in radical right-wing politics, and I currently describe myself as an elitist, a traditionalist, and an anarcho capitalist.
That will make a good video title. Can you put that in? Is there a way you could put that in one word? Is there one of them that you favor over any others?
I don't know. It's kind of difficult to really blend them all together because for me at least, each of these positions has been arrived at over the course of the last 4 years. Like, lots of people will kind of move horizontally
Mm-hmm.
between ideologies. Like, they'll actually switch ideologies. Okay, I'm a Marxist-Leninist. Oh, now I'm a national Bolshevist. Now I'm a fascist. You know, the kind of.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
for me, at least, I feel like I've constructed further and further vertically
Mm-hmm.
on my various positions and beliefs and ideology and stuff like that. So I don't know if I could sum it up in one word.
Oh yeah, that's all right. Too bad we're not German. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they have like a, I'm actually Swedish, so we have a similar language structure where you can just kind of mash like 6 words together into a
Mhm.
single word and it'll still
Yeah.
make sense.
Are you from Sweden?
No, I was born here.
Oh, okay. So you hail from Sweden. Your genetics and such.
Yes, yeah, that's it. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
So you said you've kind of recently, in the last 4 years, taken these kind of ideologies. And was that, I'm assuming, in high school or early college you learned about it?
That was definitely in high school, and I'd always been just a conservative in general. Just like a normie libertarian, where I'm fine with gay marriage and weed, and I don't like taxes. Like that
Yeah.
kind of that's kind of how I grew up, and
Yeah.
that's what felt natural to me. But
Mhm.
it also kind of helped growing up like that, kind of filtered out. So when I actually started approaching and experiencing, I guess what you could call just social justice warriors. I don't really like that term.
Mhm.
But yeah, just, people that are offended over the slightest of things, or they're complaining about microaggressions, or, just like stereotypical kind of entry level complaints about radical feminism and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
Started encountering a lot of that in high school, and to me that was abnormal. To me that was strange and not something that I had been familiar with. So to me they stood out as loons, whereas maybe someone who grew up in a very liberal environment would think that's a completely logical extension of discussions around oppression and institutional racism and all sorts of stuff like that. So for me that was jarring to kind of come into contact with.
Mhm. So, do you mind telling us what state you're in?
California.
Okay, we've been to California. We visited. I can't remember
San
anymore.
Diego.
San Diego.
San Diego, yeah.
And also we took a train to LA a couple days. And,
Yeah, I'm familiar with the area. I'm in the South.
Oh, really? So you didn't really. I mean, Southern California, it's stereotypically a pretty, liberal place. It has, a ton of migrants, and they're huge cities. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, you said that you didn't really grow up with a liberal upbringing. Was that because of your parents, or did you just?
I mean, the suburbs, you grew up in white suburbia.
Yeah.
99% white suburbs are still going to trend conservative most of the time.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, what did you say you are again? The combination of things? What were they?
I'd say a traditionalist, an elitist, and an anarcho capitalist. I think traditionalism is probably, if I had to choose one of those three identifiers, I'd choose traditionalism.
Okay. You said that you mentioned before that you had about 5 roommates or housemates. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. That would actually be my family.
Really?
So,
Okay.
yes, keeping it vague for the purposes of vagueness.
Oh, that's fine. Are they fine? Do they know all those that you're a traditionalist and anarcho capitalist?
I mean, if you're going to go around throwing words like that at people,
Yeah.
instinctively, they're kind of just shut you out. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of normal premises that I accept that, people that I talk to readily accept. And it's even just normal people, or, I guess you could call them normies. Because I was at a dinner,
Mm-hmm.
a fairly affluent dinner the other day. It was an event, a fundraising event.
Yeah.
And we ended up sitting next to an elderly married couple, and we started talking politics, and I started saying, well, how do you think in America, where your demographic, the WASP type people, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, which is what they were Lutherans, retired 70-year-old Lutherans.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think in America like that? How does it operate socially? How does it function politically? What does it look like in terms of educational achievement or crime rates?
Where those people were the minority?
Sorry?
Were you talking about like America today, or when because the other minorities?
America of the future.
Yeah,
America
okay.
of the future.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a fairly basic talking point, and
Yeah.
for them, they were like, well, of course it's going to decline. Of course crime is going to go up. Of course GDP per capita will probably go down. Of course IQ will go down. And like, there's just logical extensions to them. But if you approach them initially and said, well, here are some premises about white nationalism I'd like to talk to you about.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's like, oh, I saw those guys skinheads on Fox News. Absolutely not. Get away from me. But, if you just talk about like demographic replacement, or what do you think it would look like if there's less of you? Because people love talking about themselves.
Yeah.
And it's just logical. Like,
indeed.
yeah, of course it's going to be garbage.
So you said it was a fairly affluent event. Or would you describe yourself as, higher middle class, or would you describe yourself as upper class even?
Definitely not upper class, but probably tiptoeing on the border between upper class and upper middle class.
Mm-hmm. So in the messages you sent me, another word you used to describe yourself was very anti-egalitarian. Do you think because, you've come from such wealth that that could have affected your views on egalitarianism? Or, everyone getting an equal share of everything?
Yes, and I will readily admit that that's a possible source of bias or some kind of confounding factor when it comes to how legitimate my own opinions may be. I think that's a perfectly logical assessment of it.
Yeah.
But I think that would really only really be in effect on the front end of things, like when you're really getting introduced to this, like, this kind of anti-egalitarianism might be appealing to someone who's rich because they're seeking to confirm their biases. But I feel like for me, since I had already been, and I think it's actually relevant to mention, when I first started getting into this area of politics, I was a fascist, or I described myself as a national socialist and stuff like that. And that was generally, Marxism and capitalism are two sides of the same international coin. And you have Jewish corporations exploiting nation states and ethnic groups for their own gain and stuff like that. So despite coming from an affluent background, I quickly, at least in the first maybe half of my time as on the radical right, trended towards anti-capitalist slants of that coin. So that's why I am not so certain that I'd say those biases still exist for me today. And I tend to think of myself as, I don't think I walk around with an arrogant air around me, or inherent ability to look down on others that I come into contact with. So I don't think I'm a haughty person,
Yeah. You also mentioned that I've forgotten what I was asking. I had something in my head. I'm sorry. Hell.
So, we've talked to an anarcho-communist in a previous episode of the podcast. So I guess, like, what would you consider to be so flawed with that kind of thought process?
It really goes down to the egalitarianism and this. You've probably heard the term pathological altruism before. Is that familiar to you, maybe?
Is that everyone has a innate need to do things for no return for someone else?
Kind of. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with altruism or private charity.
Mm-hmm.
I have no opposition to that whatsoever, but it becomes pathological when it's almost like a crusade that you believe in blindly, and no matter what, you're always willing to give someone another chance. You're always willing to give someone the clothes off of your back, to the point that it's a detriment to yourself and your community. So that's primarily the problem I see with anarcho-communism or libertarian socialism or any of these quote-unquote libertarian strains of leftism.
Mm-hmm.
People that might be fascists or national socialists or monarchists might deride these forms of societal organization because they don't have an autocrat, or they're not under a centralized leader, or there's not a powerful state to keep out subversion and other immigrants or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But since that's what that's kind of the area that I came from, and now I'm at Anarcho Capitalism, which is very much freedom of association, voluntary exchange, things like that, free exchange of labor.
Mm-hmm.
My qualms with anarcho-communism essentially just come down to it only works when you're operating off of a premise that everything is environmental. All inequalities result from oppression and some kind of an instance where someone has been taken advantage of. There's no room for the idea that some people are just more industrious than others. They might be more ambitious. They might be more responsible. They might be more intelligent. So a lot of people on the far right talk about intelligence and whether or not it's genetically heritable, or how heritable it is, if it is so. But there's no room for that kind of a discussion in leftist circles, because it's just kind of accepted that it's environmental. People experience misfortune due to external oppression. There's no way they may just have been born with deficient IQ, or everyone accepts that height is affected by genes. Why not intelligence? So that's where it falls apart, because inevitably, in their quest for acceptance and inclusion, people will be accepted into this anarcho-communist society that will end up degrading it.
Mm-hmm. Well,
whether that's through crime or, of course, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. There is that thing in Marxist literature that a bunch of the communists we talked to, they mentioned that it was, it's from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. So that feels kind of like a recognition that there is inequality within, just group communities from people naturally.
Yes, and that is primarily when it comes to disability. Like, I've broken my leg, or all sorts of stuff like that.
You made me nervous for a second. I was like,
oh no. Yeah, but yeah, that generally comes with the sick and the elderly and the young, and people that are just, I don't think aging is a controversial environmental factor at work on people. So it generally comes down to things like that, and where, and of course, people can still arrive at inequality. Maybe they were not educated as well, or maybe they slacked off in school, and all sorts of stuff like that. It's just generally, that's an environmental problem, and we can solve that by an egalitarian social order.
So you talk about IQ a lot whenever you talk about this stuff, right?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a focal point of what I talk about.
Not a focal point, but I'm gonna admit I am very uneducated. I'm not well read on the subject, but I was made to read the short story Flowers for Algernon. Do you know that one?
I know it. I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
Yeah, in middle school, I think. And I think there's a quote in there or something, and it says something to the effect of, some people view IQ as like a set amount that can never be changed for a person, and some people view it as how full the cup is. You know what I mean? That you can pour more water in the cup. So, are you one of the people that from this Flowers from Algernon allegory or something, who thinks that it's just something that is unchangeable, how high your IQ is?
I definitely say that it goes both ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to draw the comparison to height. You can stunt someone's growth by denying them nutrition, or exercise, or things like that. If you keep someone locked up in a basement and you don't feed them very much, of course they're going to be much shorter than what their genes say they should be. But there's no way for them to grow taller than what the information in their genes say. So, and this is generally, I'm sure you're familiar with the Flynn effect, and people love to talk about this when IQ gets brought up. Clearly, IQ has to be wholly environmental because it's increasing as nutrition and access to sanitation and education becomes more widespread. So, of course, it follows naturally that it must be a wholly natural and moldable quantity. But, and at least by my own research, and I'd be happy to share some links with you after this discussion is over, it generally seems that there has to be some kind of a heritable component to intelligence. And in most studies, and I would look to Rushton and Jensen and the work of Charles Murray for their various studies and breakdowns of IQ and stuff like that, that it's most likely more than half of someone's IQ is actually attributed to genetic heritability.
Okay.
Yeah, they generally find 0.6 to 0.75, so, or 60% to 75%, and then the remaining 25% could be is generally left up to environmental factors and stuff like that. And I don't want to go on too long about the same subject, but I would like to add that IQ comes in two expressions. You have a phenotypic IQ and a genotypic IQ. The genotype, think of that as what the material in your genes says, and your phenotype is how much of that you achieve. So the Flynn effect can increase. The Flynn effect can totally be observed even though IQ is more genetically heritable by this simple example. If average IQ is 120 in 1900, and people attain 75% of that on average because they have poorer nutrition and they have a longer workday and schooling isn't as sophisticated. So 75% of 120 would be 12 times 7, 86, 92 or something like that, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And now let's say, due to a dysgenic, which is the opposite of eugenic, due to a dysgenic effect on IQ because of population growth, whether it's lower quality individuals having more children, or immigration from third world countries that are generally accepted to have a lower IQ, your IQ is now decreasing genotypically. So now let's say it's 105, but people achieve 95% of that. So your ceiling has gone down, but how close people get to the ceiling has gone up. So the Flynn effect is observed, but average genotypic IQ has decreased. And eventually, and we're seeing right now in a lot of countries like Finland, this is reversing. The Flynn effect has been completely reversed in Finland because they've really maxed out they've squeezed out as much of the environmental effects as they can. And they're hitting that genetic cap. And due to migration or just reproduction by people that may not be as intelligent or as genetically fit.
Yeah.
IQ is the genetic cap gets hit, and average IQ decreases.
Okay. So, have you ever taken an IQ test yourself?
No, but I have taken the SAT and the ACT, which are
Mhm.
fantastic proxies for IQ. They actually strongly correlate with IQ tests given professionally by psychiatrists or psychologists and stuff like that. So, based on that, and again, I don't ascribe to determinism. So, just because I have 105,000 IQ doesn't mean that I have to go on to be successful or things like that.
Yeah.
Similarly, well, at the very least, it seems more like high IQ people can fail, but low IQ people can rarely succeed.
Okay.
So,
well, the ACT and the SAT, you can study for those. You can't really study for an IQ test.
You cannot study for them, actually, and that's an interesting point. The College Board by themselves has done studies, and I'd be happy to link you to them after the discussion, of course, where they found that the difference between no study whatsoever and the highest quality, most rigorous tutoring courses, one-on-one, whatever you like, some of them costing in the thousands of dollars. Do you know how much of a difference they observed between people with no tutoring or foresight whatsoever and those who had the most rigorous tutoring?
Mm-hmm.
Less than a third of a standard deviation.
Maybe that's why I got 29 all 3 times I took
it. The ACT?
Yeah.
Did you study for it every time?
I did.
Really?
I mean, well, not very rigorously, but I did look over it.
Yeah.
You know, stuff I thought I needed to improve on.
I feel like
a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm probably not a good example because I didn't do it that much studying,
but the math section of the I'm sorry I'm stuck on this, but on the ACT, the math section, it seems to go over a few core concepts, like core types of algebra and stuff. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it feels like you should be able to study for that, especially if you. Well, let me put it this way: if you take the ACT and you haven't taken a certain math class, you will probably do worse than someone who has taken the ACT and has taken all the other classes you have, but has also taken that math class. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Mm-hmm. So surely there is some correlation between having more knowledge of, like, you know, at least math in this case, and a higher ACT score.
It generally comes down to the level of preparation, and this is why you generally standardized tests logically placed around junior year or senior year at the very latest.
Yeah.
When the vast majority of people taking these classes
they're fresh.
They're also taking the SAT.
Yeah.
Whereas people who don't have these skills in the first place are probably just avoiding the SAT entirely.
Oh. Okay. Do you know how to take an IQ test? Because I've always been interested in, like, how stupid I was, but I've never, like, you know, you can take them online, but that's very dubious. I got an 80 on one online. I read that was, like, borderline mentally retarded.
Yeah, I would discard any and all results that you come across online. Reliable forums to go to. Well, not really a forum, but Mensa would give a reliable one, and that would be in person at some kind of a local location. You could also talk just to your pediatrician or your normal general practicing doctor, and they could link you up with a psychologist to take a professionally given IQ test. Or if you don't want to have an exact idea, just take a standardized test. Even I believe, and I haven't looked into this as much, but I would think that there would also be correlations for like the GED exam and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the SAT and the ACT are the two I know best, since those are the two that I've taken myself.
Yeah. Wow.
And I'm not much of a grandstander, but I got a 2280 on my SAT and a 33 on my ACT.
Nice. That's a big score. So that's bigger than I got.
Yeah.
So we've stayed on IQ far too long, and that's probably our fault. But I'd like to get this out of the way. So you are a white nationalist, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Are you a white supremacist? Because to my understanding, there's a difference. No, you're not?
No, and I generally find that white supremacy
Mm-hmm.
commands or expresses itself first militantly,
Mm-hmm.
but it also seeks to actually dominate other races or
Yes.
things like that, whether
Mhm.
it's imperialism or slavery or whatever
Mm-hmm.
you want to talk about. So white supremacy, I generally find naturally concludes in domination over others, where I and most people that I associate with aren't interested in dominating different groups.
Mm-hmm.
We would just like to live separately from them
Yeah.
voluntarily.
Okay.
That doesn't cause them any harm. We would just like to live separately.
Yeah. Well, in a anarcho capitalist society, you will have people who want to, make a profit off of other people, and sometimes that means, financially dominating them. So, would there need to be? Would you need to set up a barrier? You know what I mean, between the races? If you had this, this perfect anarcho society that you want, or that is envisioned in a lot of people's heads,
Mhm.
and what would stop some races that you think are higher up on the totem pole from financially dominating others or taking advantage of them?
Well, firstly, I would say you have this core concept of freedom of association.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to enter into a relationship with someone, whether that's societally, whether that's employment, whether that's purchasing an object from them.
Mm-hmm.
There's no need to do so.
Mm-hmm.
You must have consent from both parties, and I don't see plunder of helpless people taking place under anarcho-capitalism, because built into the normal function of capitalism is competition.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, people like to say, well, if you don't have a government, even a very small one, like minarchists and libertarians, they like to talk about having a very minimal government that only does what's absolutely necessary to keep the essentials of society running.
Yeah.
You must have something to regulate corporations, because, of course, it must be a logical idea that corporations snowball
Mm-hmm.
as they gain more customers, as they gain more reach, as they gain more profitability.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, then they're going to be a monopoly, and they'll just buy up everyone who tries to compete with them.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see this logically occurring, first of all, because there's no way to buy up competitors infinitely.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, there's a point where you do not have capital to purchase your competitors. And at that point, it's just such a net loss on your system that a monopoly can't sustain itself by buying out competitors.
Okay.
Monopolies can sustain themselves now by using a state to block out competitors, whether that's net neutrality legislation and things like that make it very difficult for new ISP startups to get things running.
Mm-hmm.
Or whether it's localized monopolies where city and state governments make deals with certain ISPs so that only they can lay their cable
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. So, if anything, monopolies are more likely to occur when they have the ability, because we all know capital translates to political power, whether it's lobbying, whether that's just outright paying for super PACs and all kinds of advertisements and stuff like that for candidates sympathetic to your business or may have some kind of conflicting interests. It's a lot easier to use legislation and regulation to block out competitors than it is to use the strength of your own product and your business model and your own ability to supersede new entry into the market from other competitors and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I don't buy the idea of some dystopian singular corporation dominating everyone in anarcho-capitalism once they get a little bit of a snowball more than their neighbors.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And quickly, and I know it's a meme at this point
Mm-hmm.
in most libertarian circles, but the non-aggression principle does exist. there should be some kind of a mutual agreement of property rights
Mhm.
and each other's health, essentially. So
Yeah. Well, what would happen if you would violate the NAP?
proportionate response.
Okay.
So that's
By
why
the person that you violated?
hmm
Okay. What if you have a lot more capital than that other person that you violated?
Well, then I think it would follow if you're expressing yourself this unethically,
Mm-hmm.
people will run you out of business.
Okay.
And if people don't run you out of business, they will probably take away your right to do business with them, or
Mhm.
or your right to sell in your community, because it's not so much in anarcho capitalism that it's like everyone has their house and their business, and that's all just a million different properties, and they just happen to live next to each other.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think it would be logical that these groups would find some way to coordinate in some kind of a common way,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to licensing or all kinds of stuff like that, so that you don't have to make a million different copyright deals to sell your plans to each neighborhood or house or something
Mm-hmm.
you could make. And that's why we have local governance today, because it's a lot easier to coordinate with a local government or a local um, private organization,
Mm-hmm.
than it is to make a million different things like that. So
Okay.
I think that strayed from your original question a little bit,
That's
but I hope
fine.
it still answers it in spirit.
Yeah, that's good. So, back to the white nationalist bit. So what would you strive for in that? Would you strive for an America as an ethno-state, or would you strive for a separate, state entirely?
No state whatsoever.
Oh, yeah. Of course. So,
But generally, I like a good way to.
how do you call that
kind of-
nationalism?
Well, I guess you could kind of, just because it has the most, it gets people familiar with what you're talking about, or it's just a very easy identifier.
Yeah.
So I mean, I could easily say I'm a white society-ish, and just white nationalist.
Yeah.
Because with freedom of association, myself and 24,000 other white people, we could decide to go make our own community and trade and sell our labor voluntarily to each other, and essentially just not consent to allowing others that we don't feel fits in with our private society. We don't have any obligation to allow them to live with us or build in our community. We just reject them. And then you obviously have the whole meme of physical removal and throwing communists out of helicopters and all sorts of stuff like that. So
Yeah.
if your property rights are violated, you should respond with proportionate force. So
Okay.
if someone accidentally drives their car into my fence, I'm not going to pull out my Mick Abrams tank and blow their house up.
You're going to drive your car
There's-
into their fence.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. No, there would be a proportionate response. So
Yeah.
just
So would that be
because-
like, you have to pay me that fence? Is that proportionate?
sure. It could
Or
be
you have to
whatever
fix that fence or something?
It could be whatever you two agree on.
Okay.
It just should not be unreasonable or some ridiculous violence. It kind of goes with
Yeah, because
kind of
people...
laws today where if someone enters your house with a baseball bat, robbing you, you're actually not allowed to put 2 shotgun slugs into their chest and kill them.
Oh.
You'll actually be charged for that
Mhm.
because he responded disproportionately.
Yeah. What happens if you put tacks on the floor and you trap your house with tripwires and stuff?
I'm not so sure. I guess it would depend. If it's a tripwire that sets off a mine that blows their legs off,
Yeah.
probably disproportionate.
Yeah.
If it's Lego bricks scattered on the floor, that's probably fine.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Well, I don't understand how that would work, because if you if they weren't in your house, they wouldn't be. I'm okay. In my head, I'm envisioning like Indiana Jones type traps. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where like you set off a tripwire, then the walls crush you. If they weren't in your house, in the first place, the walls wouldn't crush them.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm advocating that you should be able to have Indiana Jones style traps in your house. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess that'd be fine because and especially in our private society that we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't expect there to be too many break-ins. I would expect to be able to leave my door unlocked at night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We live in a high trust society.
Mm-hmm. What would
So-
you make you? Oh, sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, so if we were to put like a sign outside, you leave your door
Oh my
unlocked,
God.
and then you say, "My house is trapped. Please do not enter."
Okay.
And then someone were to enter.
Let's move.
That-
Let's move. Okay. In
Okay,
that case,
fair.
I think
Okay,
you'd
yeah.
need
That's not
some
important.
sort of jury to decide
Yeah,
and
that's
decide the
not important.
circumstances,
I'm
but
sorry.
it's not important.
Yeah.
Anyway, oh my God, I can't believe you said. Can you? I'm sorry. Can you repeat what you just said because I was about to ask a question.
Me?
Yeah. I had a good question.
Yeah. Generally, I would expect to be able to leave my door unlocked.
Oh,
at night,
okay,
And
yeah.
we would live in a high trust private society because
Mm-hmm.
we're only accepting other individuals who share common cause and thinking and
Yeah.
families and all sorts of stuff like that.
Okay. So we are actually nearing up on the time limit. And but we have one more thing for you to do. It's a quick little thing. We're starting it out new, so we have no idea how it's going to go. It's it's kind of a word association game.
Mhm.
So where we say a word, and then you say the first word that pops in your head.
All right, sounds
Okay.
interesting.
And it's gonna be rapid fire. Okay.
All right.
Okay. Are you ready?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. I'm gonna start. Keys.
Car,
Remote.
TV,
Microphone.
Discord,
Donald Trump.
Make America Great Again.
Okay. Mexico.
Freaking drug cartels.
Pacific Ocean.
Just California.
Ear.
Deafness.
Brain.
I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea.
Okay.
I had no association quote with that one. Just
That's
go with the
good.
next one.
That's good. Good. Sodium.
Salt.
Perfect. All right. We'd like to thank you very much for being on the podcast. You gave us some great discussion.
Yeah, it was really great talking to you.
I appreciate being on. I'm sorry I wasn't able to talk a little bit more about my life story or
Oh.
those kinds of like formative events
Yeah.
that kind of led me to where I am today.
Yeah.
I
That's
realized
all
that
right.
was something that you guys didn't want to talk about, but we ended up skating over it.
Yeah, that's all right. We're trying to shake things up a little here. But
course.
anyway, we'd like to thank you once again, and we'll keep in contact with you.
Sounds like a plan. Yeah, keep me
All right.
updated.
Awesome. Have a nice day.
Have a nice evening. Thank you very much.